Hi friends, in the last lecture we have seen how we are making use of developing our EJBs. Now let us make use of the coding and try to work out with our first EJB programs. So while working with the EJB programs, the first thing is we need to make use of the preparation. So what are the preparation we need? So what are the bean composed of and all the things. So any bean program contains the following. So first we need the bean implementation class, which will be in the form of a session bean or a message driven bean, which contains the get methods, set methods, and the methods which are required by the bean class, and the business methods as well, which are used for calculating or whatever business methods we need, those are provided inside the bean implementation class. So this class, which is provided by the bean provider, contains the business logic for session or the message driven bean. So the message driven bean will be annotated by using the @ javax.ejb.message driven, and for session beans @javax.ejb.stateless or stateful with respect to stateless session bean or stateful session bean. Now for instance, let us see this. When we are trying to make use of a stateless session bean, then we use @javax.ejb.stateless, and we just write the bean. So all this is needed to declare an SS, that is stateless session bean, which is also abbreviated as SLSB. So next we need bean instance. So bean instance is the one which we are declaring inside the client program, and by making use of this instance, we are using it inside the client view. Like for example, if I am trying to make use of the calling the bean program inside my JSP program or the servlet program, I will just declare one bean instance. By making use of the bean instance, I will be trying to have the access towards the business methods and other methods present inside the bean instance. So the container, EJB container, internally contains one or more instances of bean implementation class, so to service session or message driven invocations. So these are not exposed to the client, so these are completely hidden to the client, but only when we are trying to call those methods, they are called internally directly by the client using the new operator by creating a new object inside the container. So the client view for our any of the beans will be in the form of a JSP file or in the form of a servlet file, depending upon the user interface. So clients do not invoke upon bean instances directly. This is the contract with which a client will interact with EJB. So in the case of a session bean, the client view will take a form of business component or endpoint interface. That is, the remote interfaces and home interfaces are helpful whenever we are trying to have the access towards the bean inside our container. So they are contacted by making use of the interfaces, not directly. So the client will be having the view only towards the instances, not towards the bean completely. So we create a JSP file or a servlet file in case of the session bean, but not in the case of the message driven bean, because message driven beans have no client view, because they are just used for working with the messaging events, and they don't interact with the objects directly. So how exactly the EJB program works? So EJB works by making use of a client, and it makes use of a request, and by making use of the home interface and the remote interface, the home interface and a remote interface will be having the proxy. That is, the home interface will be having the proxy of remote interface, and the remote interface will be having the proxy of the EJB container, and accordingly bean instances will be instantiated. So in this picture we can see clearly that whenever a client is making a request, it is going to make use of only one instance, and that instance will be providing the service to the client, whatever the client is making a request. So likewise, so there will be many bean instances depending upon how many number of clients are there, and the bean instances will be created now and then according to the number of clients. So in case of stateless session bean, the client ID will not be created. We have only instances of the bean, but in case of stateful session bean, ID will be created for each one of the instance, and whenever a client is making use of that request, then depending upon the ID of that client, the bean instance will be provided. Other beans will be completely out of the way from that particular bean. But in case of stateless, there will be no ID, so we can make use of any of the things. Okay. So next we have the interfaces. In the form of interfaces, we have the local interface and the remote interface. So the terms local and the remote are things when we are referring to the business, home, or component interfaces. So they designate the relationship between the process running the client and the JVM running on the EJB container. So the home interface is the one which runs on the client side, or client will be having the access towards the home interface, and the remote interface will be inside the JVM, which will be having the access to the EJB container. So next we have the business interface. So the business interface is the one which has the implementations, or I can say the methods which are used for working with the business methods. So they will be given in the form of at the rate of javax.ejb.local for local interface, at the rate of javax.ejb.remote for remote interface. So we have the local interface and the remote interface, and all the business interfaces or business methods are written inside the local as well as remote interfaces. So next we have something called as component interface, which looks after the resources provided by the container. So the component interface, also known as a local or remote interface, contrasted with the business interfaces, which are called business local or business remote. So here we can see that these things are not the business methods, but these things are the additional methods which will define some business methods available to the client, and they will be obtained by using the create methods of the home interface. So these are implemented by using javax.ejb.ejb object, or this is for remote, and javax.ejb.ejb local object. By making use of this, we are working with the local object of that component interface. Next we have is a home interface. Especially we see this in the form of session beans itself, and here we just use the EJB home or EJB local home. So these interfaces are with respect to EJB 2.6, and EJB home interface is used to create, find and remove session bean references according to the EJB 2.x. So home interface extend the EJB home and EJB local home, and may define methods named with the prefix of create, destroy, stop, and so on, in order to invoke the beans inside the containers. So similarly we have the endpoint interface, which make use of the some networking concepts like XML RPC, that is XML remote procedure calls, or JAX RPC, that is JAX remote procedure calls, Java extended XML Java XML remote procedure calls, and is designed to adhere with the networking protocols like SOAP or WSDL standards. So the endpoint interface is a plain Java interface that is annotated by using at the rate of javax.java web services, that is JWS web service annotation interface. So these are used especially while working for the enterprise applications which work inside the network. So next we have is message interface, which is used specially for the MDBs. So to work with any MDB, we make use of javax.ejb.message driven bean activation config equals to, and give the configuration of that activation, and by making use of this annotation we are starting the message driven bean. And the message driven bean is implemented by using javax.jms, which is Java message services, and use the implementation of a message listener, which is the interface used for working with the Java my message, that is any message driven bean. So while working with any of the Java bean programs, we need to follow some procedures, and suppose we have something called as ticket processor as an application, then we have some naming conventions. So if I am trying to construct EJB, then the suffix of that will be EJB, and the bean will be ticket processor EJB, and bean implementation class will be, the application will be EJB, ticket processor EJB, then bean implementation class will be ticket processor bean, remote business interface will be ticket processor remote business, local business interface will be ticket processor local business, remote home interface will be ticket processor remote home. Similarly, local home interface will be ticket processor local home, and remote component interface will be ticket processor remote, and local component interface will be ticket processor local, and endpoint interface for web services we make use of ticket processor WS. So these are the naming conventions. So most of the times we see in many of the IDEs that these things work well and good by themselves. So the naming conventions will be automatically taken care of as soon as we give the name to our application. So next, generally speaking, no XML. Generally speaking, EJB metadata may be supplied either by standard XML descriptor, that is EJB jar.xml. So this will be having the description of our enterprise application. So in cases where there is no overlap, there is an overlap, XML wins, or else there will be no XML. So next, we are having the annotations on the bean implementation class. The annotations will be at the rate of javax.ejb.remote for implementing our business remote. Then instead we will be declaring the annotations upon the bean implementation class. So stateless session bean we are declaring, and we are declaring the ejb.remote. So we can make use of these two things while starting with our bean program. Then the second step for working with our program is coding the EJB. So the first is the contract. The contract implemented as interfaces in Java. So it defines what our service will do, and it contains all our business methods. Like we are making use of add function here with the arguments, and here we are using calculator, which is the interface, and we call it as common business interface. So this public interface, if at all we want to make use of the some of the extensions to our bean class, then to this interface, then we can make use of the extensions of the interface. So the bean implementation class will look something like this, where we have the business method in the form of add, and next we are having the method. Then we are making use of a interface called as this is the bean, and when we want to extend the bean, we can make use of calculator bean extends calculator bean base. So this is the base class, this is the extended class. Then next we can make use of the container testing for testing our bean program. So to test that, we make use of one more program wherein we make use of the testing purposes, and we use the test cases, and this will be tested whenever we are trying to run the bean program. So unit testing will be done for these things. So junit.framework.test case. So this is used for testing most of the times, and we are using at the rate of test to say that this is a test as an annotation, and we are making use of the testing of the condition in which our program is used for working with the adding all the arguments. So here we are using final calculator common base CALC. We are making use of the bean instance, then final int expected sum 2 plus 3 plus 5. We are adding those things, and CALC dot add 2 3 5, and test case dot assert equals to addition did not return the expected result, expected sum and actual sum. So we are just making use of this program for testing the result. So next we have the integration testing. So we will package all the things and descriptors if that particular program is having. Next we deploy the things, and we create a standalone client to obtain the proxy references. Then next we package the things into a jar file and encapsulate all its contents and deploy it to the container. So the client will be having the access to through the JNDI, that is Java Naming and Directory interface. So after that we just test the results. So here is one sample program, the same program, calculator integration test case. Then we are just trying to write that and try to use that inside our programs. So this is how we are implementing our bean programs. Thank you.